Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the channel. We are going to continue on with the Grazgarian War breakdown, but this will be the first part of the last of the series. We're going to be talking about the first few battles of the war that would liberate the countries that were previously oppressed by the enemy nations. And in the next video, we'll talk about the second few battles that led of liberation and then the resolution. So without further ado, let us move on with the video. On Saturday, October 25th, 2025, at 10:20 p.m., Brazil, along with the help of small units of two armies, which were the Grazgarians and Botswana Liberists, began to assault upon the city of Gumbango. The Angolans within the city were unaware of Brazil's presence until they heard the sounds of tanks moving towards them. Immediately, the Botswana and Brazilian tanks would open fire upon the first line of defenses, which managed to kill a few soldiers and successfully weakened them for the soldiers to move in. But before the infantry could move in, Angolan soldiers would use their two artillery pieces within the city to destroy the tanks, which would be successful for the Angolan defenders, but now they had to deal with a mass wave of infantry. After the tanks were destroyed, Brazilian, Botswanan, and Grazgarian forces began to charge at the Angolans. The Angolans would use their artillery to lower some of the enemy's numbers, and then they would soon engage in gunfire. The enemy forces, despite losing some casualties, destroyed the Angolan artillery pieces, leaving the remaining soldiers to use their guns. The Angolans did their best to hold off the three armies, but it would prove to be ineffective due to their lack of ammunition among themselves, resulting in 5 soldiers to surrender the city and be captured by the enemy. Now with the city of Gumbango captured, the Nigerians would later infiltrate it and use it to their advantage in making it a military station for their forces. Meanwhile, in Bana, the Vasajan forces, along with their allies, were about to launch a counterattack along with the help of Moroccan soldiers that made it from the Tenarian invasion. As for the countries of Bulgaria and Egypt, they too would soon launch a counterattack against their aggressors. But as for Angola, the leader of the Angolan country, Emilio Bantu, realizes that Brazil and his mercenaries are bigger than his army, and no matter how many times he would order his men to fight, their population would still lower and lower till the point where none of his people would live, so he had made the most difficult decision of his life, and that was to surrender. Emilio would call King Bruno Santos on the phone and would tell him that he and his country would surrender as long as his people live and no harsh treatment would be enacted, which Bruno complied and accepted Emilio's request and surrender of his country. Now with Angola out of the way, Brazil wants to focus on the colonies of Benegal and Bali. So he orders Salem Alabu of the Nigerian army to launch an attack on the Bulgarian colonies, while he and his forces would focus on defeating the allied forces within Bana. President of Bulgaria would later call his ally and friend President Buska of Blutopia for some help, which Buska would accept and have already deployed its navy full of Blutopian soldiers to both Bulgaria and the colonies of Plastica, to help their friend defend himself from the powerful and dangerous oppressors before they could wipe out Bulgaria entirely, which would take about 3 days for the first half to reach Blutopia and 5 days for the other to reach Plastica. On Monday, October 27th, 2025, at 10:57 a.m., the Allied forces in Bana began to launch their first counter-assault on the colony of Botswana. The defenders of Botswana are a mix of rebels, Grazgarian and Brazilian soldiers led by Joaquim Victor Consuela. The Allied forces first sent their tanks to weaken the defenses, which worked for a bit, but the numbers of the defenders were still big despite losing a few soldiers. But they managed to destroy the tanks with mortars and bazookas. Now the infantry were charging towards the defenses and taking cover while shooting their guns, hoping to weaken them more. And in return they would see enemy machine guns and rifles firing back. Both sides would engage combat for a few minutes, but when the Allied forces began to push on Consuela's forces, they would see them retreating, thinking they had given it up, which the surviving Allied forces believed that they won and had made a dent into Brazil's defenses, but instead that would be short-lived because they would soon see Brazilian planes flying above them, and it would result with some of the survivors being killed by the bombs. resulting with the rest of the Allied forces to retreat. And this time, they were to take note of what they experienced and began to plan out their second assault with more time with forces. 2 days later, on Wednesday, October 29th, 2025, at 11:26 p.m., at 11:26 a.m., Blutopian ships carrying soldiers, tanks, and planes have arrived along the coast of Red Hot and Bulgaria, but they would have to face a challenge, and the challenge is to sink the Tenarian and Red Hotian warships that are blocking their path. The Tenarian ship TRNS Tannenberg began to fire the first shot, killing a few soldiers on the Blutopian ship BNS Balo. Then the Red Hotian ship RNS Raja opened fire upon the Blutopian carrier BNS Bilam, killing a few soldiers as well. Then the Blutopian ships returned fire, damaging half of the enemy's guns, and then they would send in their first bomber planes to destroy the rest of the cannons. The Blutopian bombers managed to sink the Tenarian ship, and when they would engage in a dogfight with one Tenarian plane that the Red Hotian ship had, resulting with one of the planes being shot down, the others managed to shoot the Tenarian fire plane down and bomb some of the guns on the Red Hotian vessel, but the Red Hotian vessel would return fire, shooting down the last Blutopian bomber. Then the carrier Bilam would sink the Red Hotian ship with one last volley of artillery fire. Now with the two ships sunk and out of the way, the Blutopian forces have a passage to land their forces to help their ally. On Saturday, November 1st, 2025, at 12:54 p.m., Egyptian forces under the command of General Tukarmesh Harisha advanced upon the Tenarian and Budapest occupied city of Kursakutra, where a few weeks ago they had wiped out the Egyptian defenders and claimed it as one of their outposts. First, Harisha orders the Egyptian Air Force to launch an air raid on the city, hoping to weaken the enemy defenses, within which it did a little effort, but the Tenarian missile truck managed to shoot down all of the first planes that were sent to weaken their defenses. After the planes were shot down, Harisha ordered the last remaining bomber planes he had on standby in case he needed them for later, and had decided to order their tanks to assault the city and weaken the defenses a little more before he could send in their infantry. The Egyptian tanks would do what they were tasked to do, but the Tenarian and Budapestian defenders used light artillery, mortars, and bazookas to destroy the tanks. Now that some of the soldiers are killed within the city, he orders the infantry to charge and infiltrate. The first wave of soldiers managed to fight the remaining Tenarian and Budapestian forces, but would then suffer heavy casualties due to the Tenarians using the city to their advantage, and use their tank flanking them, resulting with the survivors of the first wave to retreat. Harisha, seeing this, knew that the Tenarians still have the high ground despite losing a lot of soldiers. So he ordered his last bombers that he had to do another bomb run, and this time they managed to destroy the missile truck, even though it shot down 2 planes, and a tank that killed some of their men. The remaining Egyptian bomber pilot that had survived and did his duty would be pilot Jareh Mushkil, and he would return to the Egyptian Air Force Base alive. Now with the Tenarian and Budapestian defenses were weakened a lot more, Harisha and the rest of his men would advance into the city and fight the remaining defenders until a few of them surrendered, but when he tried to capture the officer of the Tenarian and Budapestian forces, Colonel Maji Salam, but Salam refused to surrender because he believed that if he and his men will go with them, they would be burned alive, just like what Solomon Mustafa had said. When General Harisha heard this, he had no idea what he was talking about, but was trying to convince him that none of that would happen. But of course, Salam refused, and he said that he would rather die than surrender. Harisha didn't want to do this, but granted Salam's wish and ordered his men to shoot him within the building he was in. As for the soldiers they captured, they too were scared, but seeing that Harisha was willing to treat them with civil policies, they complied to his commands and followed his instructions.